Welcome. My name is Kelly Riordan. I'm a classical musician turned creative entrepreneur, and this is the best platform for musicians that are looking to shape their career by thinking outside the box. Welcome back to the Outside the Box podcast, where we explore the career journeys of musicians, artists, and creative entrepreneurs. This podcast is supported by the private lesson business programs at OutsideTheBox.com, spelled like Johann Sebastian. So that's outside the BACHS.com. I'm Kelly Riordan, and today I'm joined by Christopher Still, who is a member of the LA Phil trumpet section and also an audition coach and business coach with a ton of great insight into the entire music industry. I've been looking forward to this episode for a long time. Christopher and I met through Instagram on his account Honesty Pill, where he posts a lot of great and also very entertaining audition content. But he's also, as I mentioned, got a lot of other projects. So of course we talk about the audition process and what makes you stand out to an audition committee and his tips for preparing with those things in mind. But we also talk a little bit more about the industry and what it means to have other things in your musical life, like the coaching and the work that he's doing as well. I really enjoyed this conversation. You guys are going to love it. Without further ado, enjoy. Christopher, thank you so much for being here today. I am so excited for this episode. As I mentioned a moment ago, I've been looking forward to this since we chatted a couple months ago. So appreciate you being here.
Awesome. Kelly, yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this too.
Yeah, it's always fun when social media friends become real life contacts and connections and not just liking each other's posts and DMs and stuff. It's really good.
That's happened
I do want to
many times too. I've met so many people that I actually haven't realized that I haven't met them in real life. And then when I do see them, I just met someone on tour in Europe that I've never seen in person, and it was super cool. So yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's such a different environment these days. But anywho, I want to start with your career story a little bit, and we've got a lot that we want to talk about. But first things first, how did you start playing trumpet? Was it your first instrument?
Yeah. So the long story short is my dad played trumpet in a fire department band, North Patchogue Fire Department band. And he used to invite me to rehearsals, and I would sit there. I think probably because they didn't have a babysitter. And so he just brought me and sat me in the trumpet section, which could be considered terrible parenting. But anyway, I just fell in love with the trumpet and the shininess and the loudness of it. In that it gave me a voice. Not that I like playing loud, but I was a pretty introverted, shy kid. And the trumpet just gave me this whole other persona where I could really communicate and connect with people. And so I thought I was going to be a band director or a music educator. And I actually did my undergraduate in music education and performance. I did a double, but I definitely thought I was going to become a music teacher and just spread that joy. So I had a great education on how to train musicians, how to become a teacher at the Crane School of Music in New York. And junior year, I had a performance of Stravinsky, The Soldier's Tale, which I'm sure you've played at some point in your life. Yep. And it's just something in my brain just switched. And I thought, wait, I think I like playing as much as I like teaching. So I went to NEC in Boston and did a master's in orchestral performance, and then slipstream, fast forward to LA Phil. But yeah, I mean, trumpet's always been my first instrument. I played piano when I was 4, but like any other kid, I didn't actually practice or know what I was doing. It was just kind of a thing my parents made me do. But trumpet's just always sort of been there as a real connection tool. Probably that came from just my relationship with my dad. There's a picture of him, right? Really Actually, I don't think I can see it on camera, but of us marching in our North Patchogue Fire Department gear over here somewhere. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh my gosh. Well, and your dad, I'm assuming had played since he was a kid also?
Yeah. Well, funny thing enough, actually, his first teacher was also my first teacher. Same guy. So by the time I got him as a teacher, he had a toupee and dentures, and he's a little bit older, but it was really cool to have the same markings in my Haydn trumpet concerto part that my dad had in his part. So yeah, pretty cool bond there.
That's wild. Oh my gosh. Well, and I'm sure as we talk about your career story, I'm sure your dad's been like #1 fan seeing this develop beyond probably what he could ever have imagined, I'm sure.
He was a very proud dad. And there was a weird point in our relationship where he would come to me and say, "Hey, can you give me a lesson actually?" And I thought, this is super weird gosh. Now. But yeah, it was a good part of our relationship for sure.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, so talking about the switch from education to performance, I think if I make an overgeneralization, I think it's probably a lot different for a lot of orchestra players. They typically know earlier on, like performance is the route and they're focusing there. What challenges came up for you in making that change in focus? Do you feel like you had, I mean, you already had the performance major also, but do you feel like you need catching up to do or had to approach things in a different way?
Yeah, I don't feel like I had any catching up to do because I went to a focused music education
Yeah,
school. And this how do I say this without sounding like I'm bashing education schools? The level of playing was just different than it was at Juilliard, let's say,
yeah,
because the focus
yeah.
was different. However, I am so glad I didn't go to a super focused, intense conservatory as an undergrad because I wasn't ready for it. No way, as a
Mm,
player or a human being. Crane School of Music was exactly what I needed. Also, the cost, hold on to your seats, it was $800 a semester. So that was great for my parents
yeah,
who
that
were,
helps. That helps.
my parents were pharmacists. So they were like, yeah, you pay for your own college, kid. Um,
Yeah.
I think I can say I probably graduated at the top of my playing class at my music ed school, which was great, meaning I got to play all the big rep. And, when we did tours and things, I was playing Pines of Rome and Bach Magnificat and all the fun things. Then when I went to NEC, I was at the bottom, but I
Mm,
also had a very different perspective and mindset on learning and teaching, I think, which helped. I had a great toolbox on how the human brain works, and then I could use that toolbox on myself. So once again, I had to climb the ladder, and I had phenomenal colleagues in NEC, but I think we all graduated way better players than when we started. So by the time I
sure.
graduated NEC, I had a bit of a handle on it. Now, just a quick bumper in this story, which we can talk about when we talk about getting an orchestra job. The paradigm changed when I actually took my first audition and I realized I didn't know anything about how to play the trumpet. I
Mm,
mean, it was like, once again, back to square zero as far as my level of awareness. And I had to rebuild my entire approach to playing, which is a whole other conversation. But music education set me up to be, I think, I don't know, people who know me, I hope they think this is true, a balanced, pretty happy guy who is a really motivated outreach teacher. Like, I love connectivity. Think about that reason I even picked the trumpet was it gave me this conduit with which to make a connection. And that has been a through line through my entire career. In fact, now with the coaching and things that I do, I enjoy that part of it even more than playing. So
mm,
catching up, not really. It was just a different path. I think if there's one thing I could tell musicians who want to be career musicians, whether it's education or coaching or orchestra, there's no linear path to this whatsoever. It is like if you watch The Good Place, it's Jeremy Bearimy. It's like all over the place. If you don't know what I just said, go watch The Good Place. But
excellent show.
yeah, if you think of it in terms of A to Z, it's going to be a really weird, frustrating, confusing ride, I think.
Mm, yeah. Well, and it's something that unfolds for every musician differently. I mean, we have one picture in our head, but then the route there, as you say on your website, it's not a linear route. Even in the auditions, like yes, we think we're just going to take a couple of orchestral auditions and we'll land one eventually. I think some people would say like it's a numbers game. You just have to take the right amount, and eventually the one finds you. You seem to have a very different approach, though. It's not necessarily a numbers game. There is some strategy to those orchestral auditions. What in that first audition did you feel was missing? I know you said you feel like you didn't even know anything about the trumpet, but what were the big things that stood out as feedback or things you had to reinvent a little bit?
Yeah, so let's talk about orchestra jobs and taking auditions.
Yeah.
So my when I got out of school, and this people have heard me say this 1,000 times, I had 3 degrees, so music education, music performance undergrad, and a master's in orchestral performance. I had $40,000 of student loan debt, and I stepped out of graduation and realized I had no idea what I was doing. Like, I don't even know what to do. Where do I go to get this job? I noticed that orchestras weren't banging down my door asking me to come play for them. It was very strange. I thought the Boston Symphony should be ready to hire me. Yeah, it didn't happen. At that moment, I realized that getting a job and also keeping a job, we can talk about that, is very different
Mm-hmm.
than becoming a really good trumpet player or a really good musician in
Mm,
general. I took 8 auditions after school and didn't, well, actually, I think I may have taken a few while I was still in school, but I took 8 auditions where flatline, no advance, probably didn't even finish the prelim list most of the time. And I was getting the same feedback over and over and over. Time, articulation, tone, intonation, does not know the piece. And
mm,
my reaction to that as an arrogant trumpet player was, "Oh, you guys just don't understand what I'm trying to do, man. You don't get it." And I really held on to that for a while. And finally, I mean, I'm pretty stubborn, but I'm also like, I'm aware, self-aware. I realized, oh, I think everywhere I go, it stinks. Maybe it's me, you know? So I started to take the feedback and say, okay, what am I sweeping under the rug here that I really am hearing over and over and over? And clearly I'm not getting the results that I need. And this is getting expensive. And now I'm starting to panic. And now I'm working at a shoe store selling running shoes to people.
Mm.
What's going on? This isn't how I envisioned this. So that's kind of where I guess you could call it my honesty pill moment, where I said, it's time to face what I know that I need to fix. And that's when I can say this. I burned my trumpet playing to the ground, like torch earth sort of thing, and rebuilt everything, including what's in between my ears. And then, like, literally at the next audition, I played the whole list, got positive feedbacks. I still didn't advance, but I at least had a better experience. The next little thing just to mention that I think is relevant to this question is, at that moment in time, I discovered my X factor. And when I discovered my X factor, it was like boosters on. I started advancing regularly. I started making finals for some pretty big jobs. Then I won my first job, and then I won another job and another. And once I figured out what that was, and the path to it was the honesty portion, I couldn't, it was no stopping me. All that stuff that was in my brain was able to come out in a way that made sense to a committee, to me, to everybody else.
I think something that we hear a lot in auditions, and I knew in my graduate program that orchestral route was not going to be my route anymore. And so I pivoted hard away from this. But I know when I was an undergrad and preparing and picturing this, a really common piece of advice or little tidbit that I would hear is it's not just the technical side. It's not just being able to play everything accurately. When you are now on the other side coaching people or even on orchestral committees and hearing what's happening in auditions, what is it outside of technique that you guys are listening for?
All right, I'm going to draw you a little picture. So,
oh, I love this.
if I were to ask you, out of 100%, what percentage is playing your instrument well relevant to getting a job? So, to rephrase it in a clearer way, all the things you need to get yourself an orchestra job or just to be a great musician, how much of that is being a great player? What do you think? What percentage would you give that?
Oh God. Well, okay, now I'm going to overanalyze it. I feel like I'm on the spot. But my first thought in this is I'm kind of guessing that being a great player is sort of just the bare minimum expectation. So it's probably, I'm going to say like 25%.
Yeah, well, you've been thinking about this for a while, so that's pretty close to my answer too.
Yeah. Okay.
Most people, when I ask that question, they're like
90.
Exactly, that's the number they say. They
Yeah.
say it's 90%. And so I usually hold this little picture up here, you know, and they're like, yeah, see, it's 90%. And I'm like, no, the playing part is the blacked and out part. Being a great player and being successful are two completely different things, although they're you know, there's a synergy there.
Intertwined. Yeah.
And I'm going to prove it to you that playing great is only 10%. Here's the math. Ready? If this is like a train leaves St. Louis, right? If 100 flute players show up for the LA Phil audition, how many of them are going to make it into the finals? How many are going to get cut in the prelims? What percentage?
Probably 90%.
90%. So does that mean that out of 100 players, those 90% were just terrible flute players or bad people, or they didn't know? Of course not. There's probably some really great flute players in there. What they didn't understand was how to present their playing when it matters, when the chips are down, when the pressure is on. So that is a huge topic of human experience, how our brains work, nerves, how we react, what you think's happening versus what's actually happening. This is so important because if you're a performer, whether you're a music educator or anything else, if you think that the great playing is the big part of the picture, you are missing the boat entirely. And what's worse, when you go to conservatory, what are you spending 90% of your time doing? Shedding in the practice room. Great. I really want you to be there because, by the way, if your time, articulation, tone, everything else is terrible, I'm not going to get to that connection part because there's too many distractions in the way. But you need to have the 10% knockdown. And this is what I call the nuts and bolts. But all the other stuff, by the way, including musical character, which is missing from a lot of the highly technical players, is one of the things that we can talk about if we want to talk about how to get a job. how you react to stress, how you prepare, knowing what you want to sound like, knowing what you actually sound like, having the tools to get from what you sound like to what you want to sound like, knowing how you react when the pressure's on, having visualizations, having a game plan, learning from failure, vigilance. There's so many things we could talk for 10 hours about it. It's just frustrating to me that I feel like most schools, most musicians are really trying hard. Let me put it in a different way. If you're a dog digging for a bone and you're digging in the backyard, you can dig and dig and dig and dig and dig until you collapse. If you're digging in the wrong backyard, you're not going to find that bone. And this sort of a focus, where it go, that focus where it's 10% is, I feel like it's digging in the wrong backyard.
Mm. Hmm. Why do you think this is missing from so much education? I mean, obviously, we don't want to throw our colleagues under the rug. We've got wonderful colleagues in universities and conservatories that are doing this teaching, but why do we think that's a missing element so much of the time?
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm not disparaging anyone's approach to music education. I don't think it's individuals. I think it's systemic to. I mean, we could have a whole other podcast about issues with systemic problems with classical music. We can talk about that later. But
Yeah.
the systemic problem with the way we approach this particular thing comes from human context of not understanding our why
Mm.
and why we're doing anything. And I think that's something that can be instilled when a child first expresses interest in an instrument, to grasp the why of it instead of the how of it. Because you can learn the how of something and never understand the why, and you can become successful and be really good at it. You're not going to be satisfied. You're certainly not going to be compelling, because it's just, there's no soul with it. But if you can understand the why, the technique can come later. But if you don't hold on to that part, then it's sort of a soulless experience, I think. And I feel like our entire industry is at the point where we really need to talk about this. I mean, we've needed to talk about it for a long time, but if we don't talk about it right now in a real way and connect back to that why, ooh, boy, it's going to be really hard to convince people to keep coming to our concerts. And the orchestras
Yeah.
and chamber groups and music educators that are doing this are successful and will thrive. And the ones who won't are just going to disappear.
Yeah, it's a massive challenge right now. We're dealing with declining audiences, declining funding. There's a lot of tension in all of I mean, across the industry right now. There's so many, I don't want to say problems because that just sounds so hopeless, but there's just a lot that we have to address that I think we have been putting off in general. But when we look at the steps for an individual to get to that point where maybe they can influence some of the future change and things that we're looking at, I'm curious what you think is the starting point for that. Like, it sounds like self awareness is maybe the first thing that you're kind of advocating for in a player. Like, in order to get the job, you need to kind of revamp your self awareness, and it's not just listening to recordings and listen to the technical side of things. But how does someone become self aware enough to find that why? Because I'm assuming that's something that you work with your clients on a lot in audition coaching.
Yeah, look, I'm not like the guru of why, by the way, but I mean, I read a lot of books and I think about it a lot because, I did have that experience myself, and now I've been watching this play out with hundreds and hundreds
Mm.
and hundreds of people at auditions, and I'm like, oh, this person gets it. This person doesn't. This one's going to get hired. That one's going to work in a shoe store. It's just the reality. There's a horrible website called Demotivators, and do you know those things you used to see in offices, like a kitten on the end of a big rope, and it says, "Hang in there." You know,
Yeah,
so
yeah, these little motivational posters. Oh
right.
God.
So this website's called Demotivators, and it's like those, but the opposite. And the one that I used to have in my studio was a McDonald's French fries Happy Meal, and it would say potential. Not everyone gets to be an astronaut when they grow up, and this is such a harsh thing to say. And I'm
Yeah.
not a harsh teacher. Okay, I lead with service, but I think that to understand how to gain self-awareness, you can quote Brene Brown, vulnerability is the birthplace of creativity. If you're not willing to let your guard down and really look in the mirror, you're not going to have that awareness. And
Mm.
it's scary, scary, scary to do that. However, if you really want to, I'm actually quoting some of my favorite authors. That was Big Magic, Liz Gilbert. Scary, scary, scary. And then Jensen Sharrow from You're a Badass. You have to be willing to get very, 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 very uncomfortable if you want to get better at something. And that's
Mm.
just not something that, I mean, think about the little kid, go in that practice room, play it over and over again until it's perfect, and then come out and you play it perfect. Wow, we've lost the why completely. Now we're only thinking about the perfection. I I just feel like that's the wrong approach. And if you're an adult, you probably, let me put it this way. It's not your fault if that screwed you up when you were a kid, but it's your
Mm.
fault if it keeps you screwed up. It's your responsibility to say, what am I afraid of? And then lean into it. Because if you're afraid of it, it's probably exactly the thing you need to lean into. So levels of awareness, if you want to know where the first step is, take off all your clothes and stand in front of the mirror, because that if you're able to do that, that is going to be the sort of, by the way, I didn't mean to make that sound like body shaming. I meant, virtually.
Mentally, yeah.
You do you in your
Mentally get naked.
whatever you need to do. No, I think it's not easy to do because it's scary. But if you really want to get there, that's what you're going to have to do.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think when we are young, a lot of these invisible scripts get written for us. Like I remember on my end, I remember being about 7 years old, not even playing clarinet yet. I was playing piano and I was in a competition. And I think at the end of that, something happened where another teacher came up and said, "Oh, your child is so musical." And I like won an award for musicality. My little brain put two and two together that I was a musical player and therefore my technique was always terrible. And so when I was in school, I felt like it was just this like mountain I was constantly climbing but never making progress on in my technique. And in reality, I think, like you're saying, I think I was mentally closed off to a lot of the practice techniques and the tools that were available to me. And so I realized later I never really learned how to practice. I don't think that was my teacher's fault. I think I just had that little block that I was totally unaware of. And it took me probably into the last year of my graduate program to figure that out and put the pieces together. But I did put the pieces together. It was a little late in the game. I wish I would have figured out earlier. But it is hard to find where you went wrong or what little connections were made for you that might have impacted you in a way that it seemed positive but could have been negative at the time.
I mean, if there's one piece of advice you would give someone in that scenario, it would be praise the effort, not the outcome. Praise the effort,
Mm.
not the outcome, because when you praise the outcome, it puts pressure, especially on a child. But we're all children and we're all little tiny babies inside. When you put that pressure on someone for the outcome, it just shuts the valve off for creativity and vulnerability, and it's over. So praise the effort, not the outcome, is the takeaway there.
Yeah, yeah, I
I
absolutely
should
resonate with
also
that.
say, when you're having that fanatical or visceral honesty, also praise the good things, because what you'll probably see is, oh, this actually wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was. And I'm not just saying to embrace and lean into what you don't do well, although you do need to do that. Also, make sure you give yourself the credit of, I am a great musician and I do feel like I connect with people, and those are important things to highlight as well. And I think musicians are terrible at doing that too.
Yeah, I think a lot of musicians tend to be really overly critical. So, do you have any clients or maybe any um, tips for people that feel like they're overly self-critical, or would say that that's one of the big flaws? Like they are really hard on themselves, and now you want them to be more honest. You want them to be more self-assessing and be more honest about what those flaws are. I'm assuming this is something you probably get a lot too.
That's such a good question. And I have many clients right now in Audition Accelerator who that's their struggle, is
Mm.
having, okay, so I mentioned this in the coachings with them, is it's sort of like the jam in the jar. In fact, I need to get a jam in the jar. I talk about this so much and stick it on my shelf. If you are inside the jar, okay, of awareness, let's say, and there's a label on the outside, you're on the inside. You cannot see what the label says no matter how hard you try, because you just can't see it. Where I, as a not a teacher or a trumpet player in the LA Phil, I'm just a person who isn't you, can look at that jar and say, oh, Smucker's strawberry preserve, 12 ounces. Easy for me to see that because I have a different perspective than you do. So I think that's the problem with the overly self-critical person,
Mm.
is that they haven't experienced what it looks like to see it from the outside. So how do you do that? Well, one way you can do it, and goes back to my X factor. My X factor was self-recording and understanding how to do that, because it's not just like record and listen back. There's a whole bunch of things you can do, and having a practice buddy or an accountability partner. Those two things
Mm.
were the X factor. Remember when I mentioned 8 auditions, X factor, ignition? My X factor was self-recording and practice buddy. So what are those tools? They're about helping get my own self-awareness leveled up through the eyes and ears of someone else. So here, you want a tip? Here's a tip. Here, go out today, find a practice buddy, accountability partner, and they need to check 4 boxes. Box number 1, they need a shared goal. If you want to get into an orchestra and you want to become a high school band director, you do not have a shared goal. You're not going to align. So for this exercise, find someone who has a shared goal. Okay. Number 2, hopefully that person does something better than you do. Maybe their time is better, or their transposition is better, or their articulation is better, or their practice skills are better. And hopefully you do something better than them, same categories, so that you guys can learn from each other. You lift each other up. And the 4th thing, and this is probably the most important, make sure that you can both give and receive constructive feedback. So let's review that again. Shared goal, better than you, better than me, can give and receive constructive feedback. If you can find someone, it doesn't have to be on your instrument, by the way, is a great place to start for, hey, what am I doing here? What are you hearing that I'm not hearing? I guarantee you there's things you're doing right now that somebody else is hearing that you're not hearing. I think of it in terms of I call it the house full of cats. If you know somebody has got too many cats and you go over to their house and you open the front door and it's like, whoa, I can definitely tell you have a lot of cats. That person in there can't smell that anymore because they're so used to it. That happens to us as musicians too, where we can't hear those things.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's hard to get out of your own head when you're in that practice room shedding away all the time individually. And that perspective, it's hard to get, especially because historically, as musicians, our path is like practice, 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 performance, practice, 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 performance. You're not getting a lot of touch points outside of lessons, which obviously a teacher is helpful for these things, but also because you're working with the same person ongoing. Sometimes you're hearing the same thing in the same ways, and it's just not really getting through to you also. So I think that recital mindset, not just in our musical journey, but also in our entrepreneurship journey, which we'll talk about in a little bit too, can really limit us. It holds us back from playing in front of other people because it's not ready yet. It's not done. It's not ready for someone else to hear
Agreed.
it. When you are working with someone through some of the mindset, you've given some really good examples or different like visualizations for people to help with some of these things and help process and problem solve a little bit. But what are some of the initial mindset tips or tricks that stand out to you as really important for someone that's going through auditions?
So a good mantra to throw out there, and I'm going to step a little bit into the woo zone here, is what comes out of your mouth comes into your life. So what does that mean? Again, you can kind of see it here is this analog radio. I'll pick it up. Remember these the kind you tune? When you tune this dial to a certain, I lost my focus of my camera. Let me bring it back. Okay, so when you tune one of these old-timey radios, actually this isn't old-timey, but it looks like one. This dial tells this radio what in the air around me to focus in on. So if I want to hear jazz and I tune to 96.7, I'm going to hear jazz. But if 106.3 is a country music station and I've tuned to that, I can turn the volume up, I can turn it down, I can bang on the radio, I can stomp around, I can get real mad. I'm not going to hear the jazz station because I've literally aligned my frequency to something else. So the first step in what comes out of your mouth comes into your life is start to recognize where are you aligning your frequency, your vibration, your attitude. I've talked about this on Instagram and got some blowback. Where is your attitude aligned and what does your life look like? If your attitude is aligned in negativity and lack, well, guess what you're going to literally attract with your receptors? Negativity and lack. And if your attitude is aligned with abundance and joy, you're going to bring a lot more of that into your life. The thing that I want people to recognize in terms of mindset, and it's such a foo-foo word, mindset, it's just happiness, whatever you want to call it, is that in this room that I'm sitting right now, and the room that you're sitting in right now too, both of those radio stations are literally flying through the air as actual sciencey radio waves. They're really both here right now. It's just my choice as to which one I align with. So if you want a step for alignment as far as your mindset, your happiness, fixed growth mindset, call it whatever you want, start with awareness of where you're waking up each day in terms of that. And if you want a great tool for that, meditation, mantra works. mindfulness. Read books on mindfulness. Did you know you can walk with mindfulness? You can eat your food with mindfulness. Thich Nhat Hanh talks about how if you're assembling the next forkful of food on your plate while you're still chewing the last forkful, you're not being mindful of the food that you're eating right now. And he believes that your body won't get the nutrients as much. I don't know. But I mean, just as a practice, next time you're eating a meal, are you assembling your next forkful while you're still chewing? Put the fork down, be here now, and recognize the food that's in your mouth. So yes, I'm in Southern California for too long, maybe, but that's how I feel about this topic.
No.
And I consistently see people
Yeah.
around me in my life who willfully tune to the wrong station for what they want, and then are bitter and angry about it and confused. Why is everybody cutting me off on the freeway? Well, because you're literally looking for everyone to cut you off. There was also 90 cars that slowed down and let you in. One guy even waved and you didn't even see it. So like, it's what your perceptions are set to. I think that brings what comes out of your mouth comes into your life.
Well, it would have been really easy after the first 8 auditions with negative feedback to just shut off completely and walk away, or to ignore all that feedback and just keep doing the same things over and over and over again. But it sounds like a lot of that alignment and that tuning for you then helped open up your self-awareness and helped create a situation where you could
Here's a
change the
picture of my
perspective and
dad,
the
by the way.
perception. Oh,
Yeah,
oh my
we
gosh,
look
I
like
love that. That's
that's in
awesome.
Long Island, New
When was that
York,
taken?
right after we marched in some North Patchogue Fire Department parade. But that lives on my shelf right there.
Oh
It's
my
just off
God.
camera. But yeah,
Oh, that's
I
so
don't know. I
cool.
just derailed our topic, but like
You're totally fine. No, I'm glad you showed it. But when we're thinking about your journey, first 8 auditions, frustrating, getting the same feedback, not progressing, probably didn't feel very good. What did you do to change that frequency, to get into the more
well,
positive mindset, to develop that self awareness? I know you talked about your X factor, but in order to do that, you had to have
I'm
some
still
kind of
working on it,
instigation there
and
too.
I'll be working on it forever. So it's not like,
Mm.
unfortunately, don't touch that dial doesn't actually work with mindset because there's too many factors. So it's sort of like an endless recalibration that happens. But one thing that helped a lot back so how many auditions do you think I've taken total?
I've taken a look at your website, so I'm probably cheating a little bit on the
Well,
numbers that you've published, but
anybody who's
do you want me to
listening,
quote
take a
that?
guess. So I'm in the LA Phil. How many auditions do you think I've taken? Well, the answer is 40 auditions, and that's a lot of auditions. And it costs a lot of
Yeah.
money, time, sweat, equity as well, not just the actual dollars. So what got me to continue, either stupidity or stubbornness, I'm not sure which, was when I was able to see myself succeed at something for the first time. That gave me
Mm.
the ability to trust that I am actually capable of doing that. Now I have to figure out, like, why did it work and now it didn't? What's the loose wire here? But it's sort of like if you go golfing or bowling or something and you get one strike or one, you know, how many people get a hole in one? But like you do really well, hit a nice golf shot. That one shot is the thing that brings you back to play again, where all the rest of them are terrible. And you're like, how did I do that? So I have a funny way of describing this to my clients, which if you read the Harry Potter books, are you familiar with Harry Potter? Okay, so
Oh yeah, fair. I'm a millennial, Christopher. I am like Harry
you'd be
Potter
surprised
through and through.
how many people I've asked that
Raised
question. Like,
me.
I haven't really read those. I'm like, you should probably read them. And they're like whatever. So there's a moment,
Oh my God. No, I was the kid at the launch party every time the new book
so
dropped. But
there's a
anyway, keep
moment
going.
where Harry Potter is time traveling, with a time spinner thingy, whatever. And he sees himself
Mhm.
do this insane Patronus charm that's crazy and it knocks out all the bad guys or whatever. And Hermione, his friend, says, Harry, how did you do that? That was a very advanced wizarding skill. And he said, well, I did it because I knew I could do it because I just saw myself do it. And then I just knew I could do it. I call this the Patronus effect. Sorry, J.K. Rowling, I'm stealing that. You can, I apologize. If you can hear yourself play an excerpt on a recording, for example, a self-recording that you made beautifully, that's not you having a lucky day or touched by an angel. That's you. That's your true potential. That's when
Mm.
you got out of your own way. And what your job now is to figure out how to get out of your own way more consistently and allow your great playing or your great teaching or your social skills or your sports or whatever it is you're trying to get better at shine through. So that is what kept me moving through all those auditions, is those one golf shots that were just so great. And of course, making the finals and a big job is pretty exciting. And you're like, oh, I got close. I have a client right now who I won't mention what instrument she plays, but she's been crushing it, but she hasn't sealed the deal yet. What is it about that person's playing or that audition that's just what's missing? I find this the most exciting thing to think about of all things. And this person doesn't play the trumpet, by the way. It has nothing to do with the instrument. It's about their brain. It is so fun to experiment and figure out what that is, because goes back to connection. That's why we care about art or music, is just it feels good to grab somebody else by the brain and connect. Did I just do a Star Trek thing? I think I did. It's like the most glorious feeling ever. And that feeling is what kept me moving through all the slog and expense of those auditions.
I would assume that it's really hard to get into any kind of flow state when you're taking an audition because you are picking things apart so hard. And it sounds like that's part of that connection that we're looking for too, is like not just playing it technically well, not being musical on paper, but finding the point where that excerpt is just part of you and part of your self-expression, and giving meaning to it to make sure that's really impactful.
I
Am
would
I
push
a
back a
little bit on
little
the
bit
right
on
track
that,
there?
and I'm gonna call you
Okay.
out on setting your frequency meter to let's do a little red flag on that comment you just said. You just said, I imagine it's pretty hard to get into a flow state.
Yeah.
Okay, let's all set our dials to it's hard to get into a flow state. Guess what? It's going to be hard to get in a flow state.
Oh, yeah,
Actually,
yeah.
it's easy to get in a flow state. Auditions are fun. They're obstacle courses. No one's out to get you. You may not make it, but it's a fun thing, man. Let's see if we can, American Ninja, whatever those game shows are. Here's how you get in a flow state. Ready? Be prepared and know how your body reacts under stress. So I create this very meticulous, I'm building this engine one little piece at a time, hand machining each part and assembling it. And I've turned it on and I've put the RPMs up and I can see if it holds together. Is any oil leaking out of this thing? That's the work that's over here, the training part. When I get to the audition or the golf course, as Bob Rotella from Golf Is Not a Game of Perfect would mention, that's where you trust. You can't do anything else at this point. If it's the morning of the marathon, it is what it is. Let it go. Like, jump in and trust that you've done the work. Now, if you haven't done the work, you're going to have a miserable time at that marathon. Good luck. You're going to be one of those guys who's on their hands and knees at the end. But if you can train it and trust it, again, this is Bob Rotella speaking. Flow state not only is accessible to you, but it's fun. It's so fun. I don't even remember half the auditions I've taken. That's why I secretly have recorded most of them, so I can listen back and learn from them.
Do you think that's a pretty big misconception for a lot of your clients, that they come in and they're like, this is work and I have to show up and make it happen, and they're not in that state where it's fun yet?
And here's the shift here. Playing at the audition when it counts is the work. That's it. That is what it is. Now, in this case, you're playing a whole bunch, you're jumping through hoops and you're not playing with an orchestra for an audience, but it doesn't matter. That's the outside part. The inside part, the audition is the work. It's no different than when I show up and play Shostakovich Symphony with the LA Phil at the Hollywood Bowl. That's the same as showing up at the audition, except for it's a heck of a lot more fun with a bunch of people playing around me. But you switch that in your brain if you're thinking of the audition as some sort of weird experience that's removed. I mean, there are certain things that are different at audition. Okay. And there are certain things that you're going to play differently at an audition than you would play in a concert. Those are nuances for each excerpt. But the brain part is exactly the same. Your brain doesn't even know the difference, to tell you the truth.
You talked a lot about knowing how your body handles stress. And so obviously we're talking a lot about the mindset, but I want to shift a little bit. What are successful auditioning orchestral players doing for their health, their sleep, their fitness, that are elevating their performance beyond just the mindset?
I mean, that's a really big question, and I can't comment for everybody, but I would say a great baseline response would be, don't do anything radically different at an audition than you would normally. If you drink a cup of coffee in the morning, have a cup of coffee. Like, don't not have a cup of coffee, because you're changing, unless you've practiced that and that's part of your routine. Again, it's just so different for everybody. Um, I used to travel to an audition and then scramble to practice in the airport, or I'd get to the hotel and I'd be like, do you have a ballroom or a conference room? I practiced in the kitchen in San Francisco once. I was surrounded by all the stainless steel. What a waste of energy for me. That was not helpful. It just stirred me up. So now,
Mm.
well, I don't take auditions anymore, but when I was taking auditions, I take the day off. It's a travel day. I'm not touching my trumpet that day. And I don't, not 1 second. And then the next morning, basic minimal warm up. Basic. I got a long day ahead of me, hopefully. Hopefully I'm going to make it to the finals. So for me, taking the day off on a travel was the key. Someone else, that may be a terrible idea, but this is why you need to get into the vortex, the flux capacitor of the audition timeline, of knowing how this process of evolution and learning works. Which, if anyone listening wants to talk more about that, because it's a huge topic, reach out. That's my favorite topic. You have to learn how your body reacts to that. So it's not a one size fits all. It is a levels of awareness thing for everyone, though.
That makes sense. Absolutely. You also talked about accepting feedback and information as being a pretty important part of this, and then finding a partner that also can accept and give constructive feedback. How do you build that muscle, or how can musicians improve their skills of
Well,
accepting and
when
giving
you finish,
feedback?
we're talking mostly about auditions here, but I think this can apply to music education. I know you have a lot of clients who you're helping them build studios and things. When you fail at something, you have two choices. Well, three choices. Let me put this a different way. When you finish the race for a thing, you have three options. You can win, pat on the back, good job, you won the race, you won the job, you taught the kids great, or you got the college teaching gig. That's the best idea. We want that to happen. Number two, this is what most people do. You can fail and sink into your excuses. The audition was running ahead. My flight was late. The list was too long. It was too hot. It was too cold. It was his fault. It's her fault. They don't like me. You don't like me. I don't like me. Excuses. And you're not going to get out of that. The third option is to feel crappy for a while. I call it the cry in your coffee hour. Go cry in your coffee. You just spent $160,000 over the last 10 years taking auditions. Go cry in your coffee. I'm sorry. It feels terrible. And then pull yourself out of that and get visceral and honest and say, what can I learn today? What do I need to learn here? What's my takeaway? What's my puzzle piece? If you can pick up one puzzle piece at every failure and snap it into place, guess what? There's only so many pieces of puzzle that there are. And at some point you'll snap it in and go, oh, I see the picture now. That's how you can start to get that feedback loop established, is starting with yourself. And then obviously getting people who you trust, who fit those four boxes of a practice buddy, to help you strengthen that muscle. And by the way, discussing with other people about their goals is a really great way to flex and tone those muscles of your own brain. So that's why I think all music educators should stand on stage and perform, and all performers should learn how to teach, because the two meet in the middle. It helps you become better at both of those things.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. I think it's something too that as musicians we develop sort of in lessons in school when we're younger. Like we're used to getting feedback, but it's feedback from typically one, maybe two sources that we have trust in, that we've identified as our teacher or as our director or ensemble leaders. And we're attached to those sources. And even then, we're still walking out of lessons sometimes and thinking they just don't get it. Like I tried something new, or I put my best in, and they're just not understanding it. Those thoughts are so tempting for a lot of us. Like it couldn't be me, it's definitely them, or it's just, just definitely a bad day or something like that. But building that repetitive skill of self-reflection and taking that in really, really helps. Something that a mentor of mine said recently was, when you get feedback, the first thing you have to do is look at it as honest feedback. Like, yes, this is trustworthy, factual information. And then the second thing you do is look at whether or not the source is trustworthy. But if you look at it in reverse, then sometimes you might just dismiss the information because the source is someone you don't know or you don't trust yet. And it's helpful to flip that a little bit. Take the feedback at face value and think about how you would change if that was true, and then decide if the source is trustworthy and it's something that you want to
That's
go
a
back
great
to for
point.
additional
And
feedback.
because not everyone is going to check those four boxes. And some people are actually going to downright try and sabotage you. I hate to say it, but there's people who are so aligned with lack that they feel like they need to bring everybody else. This is like the, crabs in a pot, where one crab starts to climb out and the rest pull them back down again. So
Yep.
that's just a bummer of human nature sometimes. But I think the mistake is when you hear advice that doesn't feel good. The first indication is, you don't get it. Just try it on for a second. Really listen. Actually, I think if there's one piece of advice that I was given from my business coach, which came from the book called More Time to Think by Nancy Klein, is learn how to really listen to someone. Like, don't think about your response while they're talking. Actually hold space for them to really do their best independent thinking and share with you and really listen. And you might listen and go, yeah, that still doesn't work for me. But maybe you're like, well, I never thought about it that way. I think that's probably what's wrong with the world right now, especially in our country, is that nobody is actually listening to each other. We're just, spewing, and we're really aligned in a weird place. So I think it's going to be difficult for people to try that on as musicians, to learn feedback loop from a practice buddy when they're not used to seeing that in the rest of the world either. This is a great opportunity for you to hone those critical thinking skills in an area that's really important to you and your job. So yeah, I don't know. That's my spiel without getting too political.
Oh, yes. Plenty of challenges. Well, and we see it on social media too. You mentioned you get flack sometimes on posts. Like you put something out into the world and we know your credentials and we know that you know what the heck you're talking about. And you've seen a lot of success in your career, not just in playing, but obviously in business. And I want to talk entrepreneurship in a second too. I'm so excited about that. But when you make a 90-second post on Instagram, there's limitations to that. You can't cram all of that information into that 90-second video when you put it out. And so there's always going to be a comment from someone that doesn't know your credentials, that hasn't clicked on your profile, discrediting it or disagreeing right away. Not that people can't disagree with what you put out, but sometimes the assumption is this person has no idea what they're talking about before we do open up to the feedback. It's a really weird shield, I think a lot of us have built, and the internet's making everything a little bit worse.
Agree.
For everyone, not just musicians.
Totally agree.
Yikes. Yeah, big old yikes. Well, one thing that we both talk about a lot on social media is that musicians are entrepreneurs, that as you're investing time, energy, and money into auditions or into a studio or whatever aspect of music that you're working on, there have to be some skills there beyond just playing and knowing the instrument. So in your career, there's been some changes. You are playing with the LA Phil, but you also now have Audition Accelerator. You also do business coaching. What sparked those? How did you find that entrepreneurial piece of you? I'm wondering if it was there even in the audition
super
period.
Fast
too.
answer to that is I was coaching people in person on auditions, and they would fly to LA or whatever and have a lesson, and I would find myself repeating the same things over and over again. And I thought, this is such a waste of both of our times and this person's money, because 40 minutes of the lesson was spent talking about something they probably should have known already. And no judgment, just they didn't know it. You don't know what you don't know until you know it. So I thought, how can I give this information to people before they get to me in person? This is pre-Zoom. I don't even know if Zoom was a thing back then or not. I don't remember, but no one was doing what we're doing right now. And I found a way to put that stuff together in like a Google Doc or something, or a piece of paper, for crying out loud, and give it to them. And then I thought, oh, well, I should record myself talking about this, and then they can just like watch videos of it. And then I started doing Zoom and like all other technical things to get that information out there. And then I realized, oh, I can actually probably teach audition strategy for all the instruments based on this. And it created my business, Honesty Pill Coaching. And my first programs were around audition strategy. And I ran three iterations of the Audition Accelerator. And then the pandemic happened and all the orchestras shut down, including mine. And I thought, well, I feel kind of weird coaching people about auditions right now. Although actually the people who continued to work on their audition strategies during the pandemic kicked the doors down after everybody else was eating potato chips on the couch for a year. But anyway, side story. I just didn't feel good about it. I just felt like I can't possibly teach audition strategy right now. What I can do is teach other people how to pivot like I did and create this new hybrid Zoom thing. I mean, my mother knows how to use Zoom now, so it's pretty crazy. And I realized that all the skills I learned, and I spent You look at my website and see how much I spent on auditions. The number I really should put up there is how much money and time I spent on learning the business running, cameras and podcast gear and lighting and video editing and scripting and teleprompters and greens. Silly amounts of money and time wasted. I help my clients avoid those mistakes. That became so interesting to me that I started doing the business coaching, helping musicians realize not only are you capable of doing so many other things with the skills you have as a musician, not only are you capable of making real money that actually pays bills and satisfies you, but you kind of have to. It is no longer okay to just be a really great trumpet player or flute player or clarinet player. It's not okay anymore. Not just because of the fact that the pandemic type thing occurred, but it's your responsibility as an advocate of the arts to do more. You have to go out and educate people in a big, giant way as to why they should care about what you're doing. And understanding your own why, like we talked about earlier, is a really great way to start with that. So my clients who I work with in business have some sort of skills, like they're great at teaching the viola, or they're great at teaching people how to ride horses, or they're great at nutrition, whatever. I have a really weird, eclectic group of clients who are all musicians first. And they are now serving people in a way that they maybe didn't think of before because they've connected to their why and they found ways to monetize, leading with service, that skill set. So that has become the thing that really fires me up. And I think it comes back to that initial inspiration with my dad of realizing the connection of possibility, creating community, which is what human beings want. We want to be in a tribe with each other, is what I think people can tap into, musicians can tap into, whether it's creating a studio or realizing what other things you probably are capable of doing that will give you a really satisfying life and also pay the bills, which is obviously super important too.
Absolutely. I think you mentioned musicians having a lot of skills that can translate. Obviously, it's all different. Everyone has different passions, even outside of music, that can be monetized or grown into businesses. But what are some shared skills and experiences that you think a lot of musicians tend to have that can make them an ideal entrepreneur
Oh, God,
or
there's so
help
many:
fuel some of
attention
that
to
success?
detail, time management, relationship to money, um, uh, fortitude, patience, learning to fail, vulnerability, inspiration, connectivity. I mean, here's the best way to answer that question. If you are convincing a child to learn an instrument, both of my kids chose instruments on their own, violin and cello. No trumpet players in the house, but me. I feel like I did a good job there. Sorry. And my wife's the clarinetist, so it's all good. My kids both came to their instruments on their own, violin and cello. And it's not because I want either of them to be in the Chicago Symphony or the LA Phil or whatever. And they don't want that either. They're doing it specifically because of all those reasons I just mentioned. They like hanging out with their friends in orchestra. They like the reward of practicing. They like fooling around on their instruments. They get together and figure out like Billie Eilish tunes together. That is the reason that you start doing that. Those are the same skill sets, the toolbox that you fill that you can then use, well, just to be a functional, great human being, I think, but also somebody who helps people understand energy and nutrition, somebody that helps people understand how to practice Suzuki cello, whatever the thing is, somebody that helps how to get your kid into college. Like that's another one of my clients is starting her business on helping people get into college, the right college, scholarships, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all things that come out of their own personal experiences. And you don't just have to show up at work and play or show up at work and teach. There's so much more available to you. And I think it's your responsibility to at least ask yourself the question, is there something more I can bring to the table here? Because our industry needs you to do it.
And asking too what people are already asking you. Like ask yourself, what do people come to me for advice on, or what are they coming to me for support on? What am I already providing to my community beyond just my playing that can be a really great leverage point? And we both talked about in our stories here that it was not something that we came up with. Like I'm sure you did not start audition coaching because you decided that that could be a business and you saw a need for it and just put the service out. People were asking you for that before you ever
Mhm.
offered it as a
For
paid
sure.
service, I'm
What's
sure.
that thing you do as easy as breathing
And
that
yeah.
you can get lost in? That probably should be what you do with your life. Unless it's scrolling Instagram, don't do that.
Yeah.
Well, then maybe you should. Maybe you should be an Instagram coach. I don't know. Probably most of you scrolling Instagram should probably not be Instagram coaching. I kid.
Yeah, I don't think Instagram content consumption is not yet a business, but if there's a way to make it work, I'm sure
We're gonna
someone's
have a
going to figure that
lot
out
of
at some point.
billionaires if Instagram surfing becomes a job.
Oh God. Oh God, yeah. Yeah, instead it's the opposite problem, but I digress. Okay, as we think about you've given so much great advice, by the way. So thank you for just like opening the curtain and sharing everything because I think this is just so valuable. And I'm wondering if there's something that I don't know, if you look back at like high school or early college, Christopher, who's trying to figure out what's going to happen in his life and his career, something that you think you wish you knew about your journey or advice that you wish you had at that age that might have made this process faster for you?
I guess if I could talk to high school Christopher, I would just say, chill out, man. Chill out. And a better way to say that would be take your work seriously, but don't take yourself seriously. And I feel like that's a wrong turn I may have taken so I think of ascension to whatever career you want as like it takes a lot of fuel to get off the ground. You think about the space shuttle with those giant boosters and they ignite and it's just like so much fuel and energy and smoke and the thing is shaking and rocking, pieces are flying off of it and everything. It's crazy time, right? And once you finally get out of the pull of the Earth's atmosphere, what happens? Those big boosters drop away and the shuttle can take off. And eventually it gets into orbit where every now and then you just have to kind of go, and that's all the energy it takes to stay where you need to be. Most of us, including myself, for sure, those boosters never dropped away and I'm out in orbit and I'm still like raw, full pedal to the metal because I was so driven by lack and I was so out of alignment that I just didn't know why I wasn't feeling what I wanted to feel and having the successes that I wanted to have. Even after I got my jobs, even in the LA Phil when I started, I was still like so focused on striving and perfection. And make no mistake, like especially in my section, we still are thinking all the time on how to get better and better. And that I love that about it. But there's a balance point that I think I've found that I wish I'd found earlier in my life. And I'm glad I found it, period, is just learn how to float, learn how to just be where you are without expending all the extra energy because it's no fun to be strapped into that rocket all the time. And by the way, you're going to need to do that in the beginning, unless you're like 100% or whatever, 0.0001%. You do need to hustle and work in the beginning, but know the balance point and know when to take your foot off the gas and just be where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that visual. I think that's really, really accurate. Something we're all still striving for. It's definitely not a one and done by any means, but
Cool.
I love that a lot. One final topic I want to touch on very briefly. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but there's obviously been some, I hesitate to like call it drama, but there's been some pretty earth-shattering news in the orchestral world in the last few months. We've got the big article that came out. You wrote a really, really eloquent piece on your website that I would encourage anyone to read. I think it was a fabulous, fabulous response to what was happening and just kind of your thoughts and insight. We hinted earlier at some of the problems that are happening in, attendance and orchestral business in general. And no one person has the answers for all of this, and so I definitely don't expect you to have anything. But in general, what are some things that you think we can do to just improve how the classical music business and how orchestral business is running right now? Whether this is in diversity of repertoire and representation, whether this is in our ensembles and diversity and representation, what are some things that you think would make a really big impact that you're hoping to see in the next few years?
I mean, this is a huge topic, and I am certainly not the spokesperson for equality and balance in this. And thank you for your kind words about the article that I wrote. My wife, Amanda, who is I think I mentioned earlier, maybe we were before we started chatting, that in my business, my wife, Amanda, is my business partner. And, talk about things that I do well and she does well. We are a perfect blend of that. The things that I do well, I love, and she does not like to do. And she is the wordsmith of the family. So I wrote my scattered thoughts and cobbled together what I wanted to say. And then she helped me express it, not like a caveman in that article. Go to honestypill.com library and read The Invisibility of Privilege if you're wondering what Kelly's talking about. this is such a huge topic, and I'll just tell you my personal perspective. It has been a very long, slow evolution for me to even understand that there is an issue. I mean, I literally am steeped in privilege. I am white, male. I play the trumpet for whatever that means. Straight, came from a family that supported me. Like, the whole world has been designed to support me and people who look like me. Everything. And it's like, how would I even know that wasn't a thing? Because I've just been part of it. The reason I know about it now is because I happen to have married a feminist who turned me into a feminist, and I am willing to be vulnerable and read the amazing work that so many are doing right now. And you know all the people I'm talking about, giving selflessly of their actual money and time, putting themselves right in the target for people who are not willing to listen. You know, I talked about Nancy Klein, Time to Think. Just listen for a second and give space. If you want to hear a great description of this, my podcast, I had a guest on a while ago. I don't want to digress here, but I asked my guest, I'll give it to you in the notes so you can find it. I asked, what could I do to support you right now in this? And she said, give us space. Give up more than you think is necessary. You know, I think it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg maybe who said, like, how many women should be on the Supreme Court? She said, all of them. Think about that for a second. Think about that. Really think about what I just said. Does that bother you? If you just heard me say that and it bothers you, you haven't thought enough about it. Guys, it's been men the whole time. It's now time to literally make space and give more than you think. It shouldn't be 50-50. Sorry, that's my perspective. That's how I feel. Not to get too political, but guys, we haven't been doing a really good job running the world lately. Look around. So I would love it if we all just said, it's not just men and women, by the way. I mean, there's plenty of psychopath women in politics too, but like, just make space for each other. And the fact that we have no women representation really anywhere, let's be honest, is a problem. It's a huge problem. So I don't know what to say, and I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that me shutting up, as a person who just talked nonstop for an hour, it's funny for me to say that, but it's time for me to step out of that space and make space for someone else. I just want to say this. I was thinking about this yesterday. Does that mean I should quit my job at the LA Phil and make room for a female trumpet player to take it? How can I make space in my life for other people so that I can inspire and give them the pathway to end up there? That is something that I'm wrestling with right now, and I'm learning a lot from people on the internet who are way more eloquent than me at talking about this. So, yeah, I don't even know if what I just said made sense. I just know that it's time to think, guys. It's time to think. It's time to listen.
Yeah, that really resonates. It does make sense, by the way, and it really resonates. And I think this is something that feels like it's been bubbling for a long time. You know, we had a big Me Too movement a few years ago, and it feels like classical music is unfortunately just catching up with some of these things. And a lot of the stories that have been known but not public, and the issues that have been discussed behind closed doors but not in news articles, are now coming to light. And obviously there's a lot more, I'm sure, coming down the pipeline. I know if your DMs have been anything like mine, then there's definitely a lot more coming down the pipeline, as people feel safe in sharing what's happening. But I think giving space not only to elevate individuals, but also just to elevate those stories and those voices, and make sure that people are hearing what's happening, and that we're taking that at face value, and not, again, like when you get the feedback, when the industry gets the feedback, listening to the feedback and then assessing credibility later. Not that we make rash decisions and changes based on things that we haven't vetted, but we have to take things at face value to then also ask the right questions and follow up to assess if something needs to change and how we react to those things too. So giving space to the voices and the stories is so important. And I was just really struck by what you wrote. Plenty of colleagues have decided to stay silent on this and have not said anything, or have been very vocal in the other direction. So I just want to say thank you for giving that space and for putting that out there. And thank you to your wife for the copywriting support, because the combination of you guys, what you put out there was really impactful. And I definitely appreciated it. Reading it was meaningful.
I think it's ironic. I don't want to be a man who's mansplaining about women's rights and things. So like, great. I'm glad you enjoyed the article, but go read other people's stuff because there's like so many other people writing great things.
Yeah.
The book I usually recommend on podcasts is Golf is Not a Game of Perfect by Bob Rotella. But this conversation, please, as a human being, everybody listening to this, go read, actually listen to an audiobooks because it's just beautiful. Nancy Klein, More Time to Think. It's the second book in her series. Her first book was Time to Think. Her second book is More Time to Think. If she writes another one, I'm sure it'll be even more time to think. But go listen to Nancy Klein, More Time to Think, because it will teach you how to interact with another human being, whether it's your kid, your spouse, your boss, your colleague, whatever, how to listen with like pure listening skills. And I learned so much from that book. It's in my mental gym. I'm constantly looping through that book.
That's awesome. I have not read it, and it's on my list now. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Lots of incredible insight today. I just want to say thank you again for running the gambit with me. We covered a lot of topics, but again, so much really incredible advice. And I'm excited for those that listen to hear this and then also apply what you've shared so far. We'll link all of Christopher's, website and all of his resources, everything in the show notes, of course. But if you want more information, you put out the best content on social media too. Like, it is entertaining, it is educational. There's always a sense of humor about it, which I really appreciate. So Honesty Pill on Instagram, and
I'm
I think on
actually not
TikTok
on
too,
TikTok.
correct?
I probably should check that out at some point. But honestypill.com, get on my newsletter. I send out a Peak Performance Mondays newsletter almost every Monday, and you can catch anything there. And there's lots of resources. Listen to the podcast too, because there's really great guests there, and they have lots of interesting things to say. And Kelly, thank you for the work you're doing too. I really resonate with the fact that you're taking such a leadership role in entrepreneurship, and I'm sure your clients are thrilled to be working with you too. And you're just a great example of what I think is a great iteration of what musicians can be. So I appreciate you.
That is all the time that we have for today's episode. Thank you again for being here, for tuning in, for supporting the show. Your feedback and engagement really does mean the world to myself and the entire Outside the Box team. So please don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. And if you have any requests for future topics or guests, please leave a comment or send me a note on social media. I'm happy to take those requests into consideration and see what I can do, because I want to make sure that the content and the career journeys that we're exploring are helpful and supportive of the career goals that you all have as well. Thanks again.